Yeah, well, good day, Sean. Thanks for coming in, mate. Christianity, can you tell us where you're up to with that?
This sort of scenario. Now, I think what the best analogy is like back in the Greek times, there were the sophists, and the sophists were kind of a rebellion against, Platonic, argumentation, etc. And that sophistry is sort of what you see when people get upset about something. They just start, going into a sort of a big hoo-ha about what's this and what's that, and it just devolves, into a mess. And so that's a sort of a similar pattern, and it's a human condition, but it is a living condition, and we've seen this in the way that animals are treated as well. But animals are a little bit more robust because they don't necessarily have language and a divine spirit. I mean, I'm not saying they're not divine and they don't have souls. I think they do, but it's on another level where little g gods, like we've been made in the image of God, so we do have there's a threshold that we're beyond. So that's a different argument or a different discussion. But at the same time, like, that's the problem that we're seeing now, is that his work in understanding psychic plague is the term that he gave it. Psychic plague is a kind of a condition where it spreads like a disease, and it's difficult because even the treatment and the assistance that's required are not easy to implement or to apply because of that armoring. It just gets very messy. So yeah, he wrote some interesting books. Like, one of the books that he did write was The Murder of Christ. That's the title, and it was about how Jesus suffered through that type of barbarism or psychic plague, I guess. And from a theological perspective, like, understanding how Jesus knew how to deal with that and how he took that as a way to help people become part of his church is the important, lesson from the book. But yeah, so that's the problem now, is we have like and I don't know if a population level would have any impact on how these things will play out. Like, people often talk about, oh, well, the world's getting overpopulated, etc. I don't think it's overpopulated at all, but there are times where the birth rate and the death rate and the rate of people's, the replacement rates, etc., work well. And there are times where it goes out of whack as well, and you get these difficulties. And that was seen in the Roman Empire back around Jesus' time. There was problems that they had, and they did have what is now termed, I know it seems, it's a terrible way to just give it some textbook terminology, like managed decline is what they call it. This idea that as a society goes into decline, then the authorities are going to manage it with their solutions, which is this net migration and all this sort of thing. That's inappropriate. But realistically, the story does center back to money. And, I think overall, the lessons back from that time are just as good today as they were then. And that's the problem that we see now, is like the cost of living and the cost of operating in the world is derived from, I mean, it's usury. Now, usury is an interesting one, because I know by definition most people see it as like interest, and interest is definitely the most important component to usury. But I think more importantly, it's the entire system that revolves around it. Like, if you were to see it as a wheel, the axis of the wheel is the interest component. But there are many spokes that go about that make sure that that remains in place. So it's not just the fact that the central banks or central bankers have the ability to produce money. It's any authority would be able to have that, and you could have it as a distributed authority, in like you could have it as public money, but somebody holds the levers, and the levers have to have a natural law ordering, I guess is the best way to put it. And that's the problem we don't have is, unfortunately, charging interest on interest is doesn't really work. It's like it gets into a lot of other aspects of science that are still unexplored as well. Like, if science knows, we haven't discovered the real mechanisms behind gravity, and that's true. We know it exists. We just don't know how it exactly works, but they're very close to some of the ideas. The problem is that it's the same with energy. Energy is also a little misunderstood. Like, we know the laws of thermodynamics, and we know that there's ways to circumvent aspects of the laws. Not entirely. You don't just break the law and then everything changes. You can circumvent aspects, and then it leads to new conditions, new outcomes, etc. So money is one of those things that it has to follow certain natural laws as well. And it for the last, for a long time, I'm not going to say exactly how long, but at the same time, they're not following natural laws. And when you get runaway debt and problems, you get into this scenario where things get out of hand. Now, the irony of all this is that we did have in those ancient times debt jubilees. It's a hard thing to deal with today, to say to the authorities, maybe we should have a debt jubilee, because now they've gone so global, and they're literally after a global government anyway. So the question is, do we allow them to have that sort of power? Because their ultimate goal is to never have a debt jubilee, and then you just become more and more enslaved or ensnared in that trap, that debt trap, which gets into the whole, world conspiracies about World Economic Forum and it's 2030 and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's sort of their solution is we're not going to give you a jubilee. You just give us everything you have and we just rent it back to you. That's their solution, and it's staring at us right in the face. Like, their whole their attraction to AI and their attraction to the technologies is going to be their downfall, sure, but in the meantime, they're going to do everything they can in their power to try and make sure that the outcome goes in their favor. And that's the difficulty that humans always, have to deal with. Is like, as individuals, we can deal with so much in our region of control, but when it starts to go to local areas, and then to states, and then to countries, and then of course to the globe, it's very complicated, and it does require a lot of people to be compassionate, is probably just putting it mildly. But that's the point, is like, from a theological or philosophical perspective, how many of those people are Christian? How many of those people that are in power in these different groups have an idea that, there is a better, more compassionate way? Very rarely do we see anyone that is openly Christian and compassionate. Like, we've seen all these, numbers coming out just recently about like the different spending on military and all these different things, and yet all of those amounts of money that is spent could easily solve housing and health and all these problems. But most people who are armored will sort of be pushed to one camp or the other to either support it or decry it. And that's where it gets difficult, is because people are so caught up with their own personal issues. And again, this goes back to how the bankers have that power. Like, if they can create enough tension on the individual level, where a person's own day-to-day is so stretched thin, they really don't have any time to fight bigger problems and bigger agendas. And in a way, it'd be nice if AI did continue to develop and understand and have a compassionate side to it. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, because I'm not a believer in AGI. I do believe that divine souls, like individuals and living things, are not in any way derivative of silicon. Like, they're not going to come out of silicon. But I'm not going to reject the idea that some crazy person would try to capture a soul in silicon. I still think, though, that that's a little bit too sci-fi. But it definitely looks that way when you deal with AI. Like, it's pretty magical in that sense. Like, a lot of people who are new to it or have been using it sort of would think, it's almost like you're dealing with, and there's already evidence that people are using it as their therapist and all these different things, which is a little frightening to think that, people are going to be stuck away in some dark room just chatting away to digits. They need human involvement, human interaction, and that's not fair to them. But at the same time, that's the trap, and that's why it's attractive to people who are evil, because it's the perfect beast system. And that's that whole prophecy about the beast system, the idea that it's all seeing, all knowing, all, it's ubiquitous. But yeah, so that's where we're at. It's a difficult scenario. So that was what I meant. And just to circling back to what you said, like, it is more recent in the sense that it's the correct religious path. And I think too, I probably should point out, like, there's theological and there's religious. You can have a theological position, but not necessarily be part of a religion. And that's how a lot of people are these days, more and more. Unfortunately, religious institutions are on the demise. Like, people don't go to church and they don't gather. That's not good in many ways, because human beings do have the need to interact. Of course, the sort of atheistic, mechanistic, reductionist, evolutionary types, they see human beings as just, mammals, etc. And sure, we're mammals, but we are different in so many ways, because, like I said, we have a divine spirit. But that doesn't change our body's needs to have tribal connection and interact with one another. And that's what derives and provides for family, or coupling. People meet the opposite sex, and then families spring from that. So that's important, and that's why we see such a difficult time for the birth rate in many cultures, because we're so drawn to just survival, that, like, survival as in having to earn a wage just to pay bills and pay for food, that it's becoming untenable. And that's the managed decline. Going back to that is what they called it, managed decline. And their solution was, we'll just bring in people from another area and provide a sense of, like, a form of welfare of some kind. In the past, that welfare, ironically, was military service. And now there's talk that that's going to be their way to get citizenship. These, like in Australia, I guess I'm not an expert on the numbers. I don't know. And I'm not anti-migration at all. I think migration's critically important, but illegal migration, that is people that sort of come in and try and skip past the barriers, that's a little difficult to swallow, because if it was like that, then I mean, the world would be an interesting place, that's for sure. But I don't necessarily like being a libertarian. It's a hard one to juggle with, because libertarians are like, well, the government shouldn't have any place to tell me whether I can come in or go anywhere. And it's true. I mean, we do have travel, and we have the ability to travel, and we can move around. They have all this whole visa structure. It's been around for, I guess, over 100 years now. But you never had that in the past. Like, people just moved around the world, and if you could afford to get passage, then you would do that. And then you had to deal with the people where you landed. And now, of course, that's in the hands of governments and organised groups in that sense. It's kind of, you got to get a big 35,000 foot view to know how that works. And going back to the Roman and the Egyptian period when Christ was in existence, it's a difficult one, because they had to sort of, maintain their empires, and people did that through service. So now, is that what we're going to see in these Western countries? That people who came in who want to be granted citizenship are going to be told, oh, well, if you serve in the military, you will be automatically granted? Let's talk about it. I mean, there's news articles, you can find them, and they've already said it. It's not a conspiracy, but and look, at the end of the day, if you do the service, that's well and good, but you have to understand the reason that we had these military arrangements in the past, just like we have today, because who was it? Michael Savage says, it's borders, language, culture. So that's the reason that you have that, is you're trying to defend the sort of a status quo. You have a border around an area or a countryside, or even a whole continent, and you have a language that's universal amongst the peoples, and then you have a culture. And so the difference is like multi-ethnicity is a good thing, but multiculturalism is difficult. You can have multiculturalism, we see it exists across the world in many places, but multi-ethnicity is normal. But that's usually the easy target for those to create division, and so that's usually a problem when people have some sort of racial reasoning as to why people shouldn't come or go or need to go or whatever. That's not fair on humans, because we're all human beings, we're all the same. But yeah, that's a complicated topic for the most part.
Thanks for coming in.
No worries.